Hello, brothers and sisters. Roy Silva here. Thank you for joining me again as we continue our 2026 course of study, Come Follow Me. And today we're covering the lessons for the last 2 weeks, which are the end of the story of Joseph, which we started in our previous lesson, and then all the way through the beginning of Moses' story. So that's Genesis 37 through Exodus 6. So as you'll recall, we were talking about Joseph and how he is, I think, in such a universally and perennially relevant way, an example to us, because he was in a terrible situation, right? He was in prison unfairly. He had been shown this future point in his life where he was going to be respected, where he was going to be reverenced, in fact, by his brethren and his parents. Remember the vision he had of the 11 stars bowing down to him, and the sun and the moon also representing Jacob and his wives, the sun and the moon, and then his 11 brethren. And so he had that expectation, and yet things seemed to go so terribly and catastrophically wrong, and it seemed completely impossible that he was even going to see his brethren and his parents ever again, much less that they would bow down to him or reverence him or esteem him. So that is where Joseph found himself. And then we have the whole thing about the interpretation of the dreams, where it seemed like this miraculous chain of events had happened, where Pharaoh's own butler had come into contact with Joseph. I mean, what were the chances? What convergence of circumstances had to occur to make this person of extremely high rank in Pharaoh's court, who had communication with Pharaoh on a daily basis, come into contact with this anonymous Hebrew in a filthy prison? And then this butler has a dream that Joseph interprets, and Joseph's last words to the butler are, "Remember me when thou comest before Pharaoh again." And how Joseph must have thought, like, okay, this is the hand of the Lord. It's got to be the hand of the Lord to make this happen. This is how he's going to bring me back. And then what happened? The butler forgot. 2 more years passed. That's more than 700 days of waking up in the morning and thinking, like, what happened? Has God forgotten me? What did that mean to have the butler come and then have nothing happen? Is the butler even still alive? I mean, just there was no way to understand what God was doing. And it could have seemed also that there was no way to reconcile that with love and with being valued, right? And so we talked about how Joseph could have become discouraged, and yet he chose instead to have faith, to be of good cheer. If he had let himself become discouraged, I often use this as an example. Think if that final day in prison before he was called for to go before Pharaoh, what if he had woken up that morning and said, you know what, this is just wrong. I trusted in God, and look what's happened to me. I've been separated seemingly forever from my family. I've been taken into this foreign country, and yes, I had those blessings in Pharaoh's house, and in Potiphar's house, and was given responsibility and trust and everything, and then that ended in the worst way, and now here I am, forgotten and anonymous, without family, without friends, in this foreign prison. And he could have looped a length of rope over a rafter and hung himself, and just said, I'm done. But if he had done that, he would not have known what God had in store. And so that's why I say it's universally, perennially applicable to us. Joseph's experience, the choice whether to trust God or to become discouraged, because it is a choice. And it's like a choice between drinking two different cups with two different fluids in them. Either we take the cup of discouragement, or we choose to take the cup of faith and being of good cheer. And so God did work that miracle. Joseph woke up that morning in that circumstance where he was at the very bottom of conditions, and he could not have gone lower, and helpless. No, it's not like there was some there was some harbinger of what was about to happen. It's not like, there was some glimmer of hope that something was developing, that something was happening. No, he woke up that morning. It must have seemed like any other day. And when he went to bed that night, instead of being a foreign prisoner in this place that could not have been comfortable or maybe even safe, being in this prison, he woke up that morning in that situation. And when he went to bed that night, he was literally the most powerful person on the planet under Pharaoh. Because remember, Pharaoh says to him, except in the throne, only in the throne will I be above you. Otherwise, you are me. You are deputized to exercise my authority and all my powers and to rule over this kingdom, the most powerful and magnificent kingdom on earth. So I love that story. And then we have the whole experience with the brothers coming before Joseph, and why didn't he reveal himself to them right away? What's with all of that elaborate back and forth? Putting the gold cup in their bag, and then bringing them back and accusing them of being thieves, and making them leave bring Benjamin down and then leave him as a hostage, and all of that. What is going on there? And I think that, for me, the way I understand that is that Joseph was testing his brothers to see whether they had changed, and remember, Joseph and Benjamin were the only sons that Jacob had with Rachel. And so the other 10 were Joseph's half-brothers, but Benjamin was his full brother. And he wanted to know whether they were treating Benjamin with the same jealousy and rejection and disrespect, whether they were as callous towards their father and their father's feelings. And so he engineers this whole elaborate multi-stage test to see, will they care about their dad and their dad's feelings? Will they protect his Joseph's little brother Benjamin and treat him kindly? And so, to me, that is the whole purpose of these machinations. And then, so finally, Joseph reveals himself to his brethren, who, you can just imagine this. They've done everything, the thing next to murdering this guy, stripped him of his freedom, of his identity, of all his family ties, and sold him as a slave. And Joseph says, don't worry, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And so he forgives them, and they bring Jacob up, and when they tell him that Joseph is yet alive and he's the ruler of Egypt, Jacob can hardly believe it. And we talked a little bit about what Jacob went through, right? And how this must have seemed like the cruelest, hardest test of his faith, to have this son who he loved so much, who he'd made the special coat for, to have that love thrown back in his face when the brothers bring the bloody, torn coat, that symbol of love that he had for Joseph. And God had not protected Joseph from this terrible death, it seemed to Jacob. And how Jacob had a choice, whether to become angry, to become bitter at that seemingly terrible unfairness and injustice. And so they tell him, no, Joseph is yet alive. And he comes to him, and he says in chapter 46, verse 30, in Israel, Jacob said unto Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive. And then he brings his sons Ephraim and Manasseh to Jacob to be blessed, and Jacob says, who are these? And Joseph tells him, these are my children. And Jacob, this wonderful comment that just goes right to my heart. He says, I had not thought to see thy face, and God has shown me also thy sons. And so this wonderful, tender reunion that on this side of the veil, Jacob, who we know from section 132 is going to become exalted, is going to become like our heavenly parents. He and Leah and Rachel, his wives, are now gods. They're not angels, but the Lord Jehovah revealed in section 132 that they sit on thrones and are exalted. And so this wonderful mercy at the end of Jacob's life, that he gets to see not only Joseph but his grandchildren through Joseph. And then he dies, and Joseph waxes old, and he prophesies before he dies. And this is a fascinating thing, because Joseph Smith restored just paragraphs and paragraphs of this prophecy that had disappeared from the Old Testament, from the book of Genesis. Just a little fragment is left, just like it's kind of comparable to Enoch, how Enoch gets like a verse and a half in the book of Genesis. And then when Joseph Smith was translating the book of Moses, he restored back chapters and chapters about Enoch's ministry and the experiences that he had and who he was. And so here it's, I believe, the longest excerpt from the Joseph Smith translation that the church has included in the Old Testament. And it's Joseph's prophecy where it is revealed to us that the Lord shows Joseph that, look, your posterity are going to be in bondage for 400 years, but I'm going to raise up a deliverer. And he says, this is the Joseph Smith translation of Genesis 50. A seer shall the Lord my God raise up, who shall be a choice seer unto the fruit of my loins, my posterity. And he prophesies that in verse 29, and I will make him great in mine eyes, for he shall do my work, and he shall be great like unto him of whom I have said, I would raise up unto you to deliver my people, O house of Israel, out of the land of Egypt. For a seer will I raise up to deliver my people out of the land of Egypt, and he shall be called Moses. And by this name he shall know that he is of thy house, for he shall be nursed by the king's daughter, and shall be called her son. And so he prophesies of Moses, and he prophesies of the Book of Mormon in the Bible. He says, wherefore the fruit of thy loins shall write. This is the Lord talking to Joseph. And the fruit of the loins of Judah shall write. Well, we know that Lehi and Ishmael were from the fruit from the loins of Joseph, and so this is the prophecy that the fruit of the loins of Judah shall write, and that which shall be written by the fruit of thy loins, and also that which shall be written by the fruit of the loins of Judah, the Book of Mormon and the Bible, shall grow together unto the confounding of false doctrines and the laying down of contentions, and establishing peace among the fruit of thy loins, and bringing them to a knowledge of their fathers in the latter days, and also to the knowledge of my covenants, saith the Lord. So I was looking for the exact site for that. That's 1 Nephi 5:14, where when Nephi and his brethren return from Jerusalem with the brass plates, Lehi searches them and sees that he is a descendant of Joseph. So it's a remarkable prophecy, and maybe most so in what the Lord in his mercy has shown Joseph all the way through the latter days. Not only the bondage and the deliverance through Moses, and not only the production of scriptures that will be kept by Joseph's posterity, which will complement and be a second testimony with the records of Judah, the Bible, but also, get this, Joseph Smith. And he talks about Joseph Smith coming together or coming forth, and he says, and that seer will I bless, talking about the one who will come in the last days and bring forth these records of Joseph's posterity. He says in verse 32, and out of weakness shall he be made strong in that day when my work shall go forth among all my people, which shall restore them who are the house of Israel in the last days. And that seer will I bless, and they that seek to destroy him shall be confounded. For this promise I give unto you, for I will remember you from generation to generation. And his name shall be called Joseph, and it shall be after the name of his father. And he shall be like unto you, for the thing which the Lord shall bring forth by his hand shall bring my people unto salvation. So remarkable, right? That there is, that the Lord in his mercy showed all this thousands of years, 3,000, 3,500. I mean, I guess this was, we don't know exactly, but maybe around 1600, 1700 BC, showed him thousands of years into the future, all the way into the latter days. And so we have that. And what a testament of the Lord's mercy and his power, and how his plans are so much bigger than we can begin to comprehend, and things which in our lives seem to be detours and setbacks, and even things that take us forever away from what we most wanted, and maybe even what he seems to have promised us, that he is faithful, that if we trust him, he has a plan that is much better than anything we could hope or think. And so that's why I love the story of Joseph so much. All right, so Joseph dies. They embalm his body, but they don't bury it in Egypt. They take it back like they did Jacob's body to be buried there back in the land of Canaan, where Abraham, Isaac had been buried, Jacob had been buried, and so they take Joseph back there. And of course, when Jesus was resurrected, all of these people came forth in that resurrection and entered into their exaltation. So so that's the story of Joseph. Okay, so he dies, and we read, there arose another Pharaoh in Egypt who knew not Joseph, and he enslaves the Hebrews, the Israelites, for 400 years. And we all know the story. We've seen the movie, Moses being put in the basket and set in the reeds to escape the edict of Pharaoh to kill all the Hebrew firstborn, or I'm sorry, all the Hebrew males, right? Not just firstborn, all the Hebrew males, and how he grows up in Pharaoh's court. Now, we don't know to what extent he was aware of his heritage. I think that the Hollywood version, where Pharaoh's daughter somehow obfuscates where she suddenly comes up with this baby, makes some sense, because if Pharaoh was ordering all the Hebrew males killed, I think he would not countenance having one of those babies raised as his own grandchild in his court. So it seems likely to me that there must have been some kind of deception practiced. Pregnancy is a hard thing to fake, so who knows what that story is. Like I say, I think the movie version is as plausible as any other conjecture we might have as to how it came to be that this Hebrew became a prince of Egypt. But what I think is fascinating is how Joseph and then Moses 400 years later are shadows of Christ, in the which they are rejected by their brethren and then end up saving their brethren. And we know the story that that Moses saw an Egyptian smiting, and I understand that the word that's used in the Hebrew is more than just hitting. It could maybe mean about to kill one of his brethren. So he must have, well, I guess we don't know. It could have been that he didn't know that that the Israelite was actually, that he belonged to the tribe or to the nation of Israel. He might have just once again, as in the movie, had compassion and sought to prevent this helpless person being murdered by the powerful Egyptian. But he defends the Hebrew, saves his life, and then the next day, when he sees a couple other Hebrew slaves fighting, he tries to make peace between them. And one of them says, "Oh yeah, wilt thou slay me as thou didst the Egyptian yesterday?" So word has gotten out, or maybe this guy actually saw what happened. And so Moses flees, and he goes into the desert, and we all know the story of Jethro and his 7 daughters, and Moses becoming basically a shepherd and seeing the burning bush. Now, one thing that has occurred to me about the burning bush is I can't help but wonder if that is not a type or a symbol of what God does with us, his saints. He passes us through fire. He refines us as with fire. Yet it doesn't destroy us if we have faith in him. If we trust him and endure that refining process, then we are not consumed. And that to me makes the burning bush a fit symbol or medium through which Jesus, Jehovah, would reveal himself to Moses. And it's interesting that that's one of the changes the Joseph Smith translation makes, is that as we have in the corrupted version of Genesis, he says, I reveal myself to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but by my name they did not know me. And of course, that's not true. We saw in the Pearl of Great Price that when the Lord is talking to Abraham in, chapter 3, he says, I am Jehovah. And so Joseph Smith, when he comes to that passage in Exodus, where he's revealing himself to Moses and telling him of his mission, he says, I revealed myself to Abraham, Isaac, and unto Jacob. I am the Lord Almighty, the Lord Jehovah, and was not my name known unto them? So that is Exodus chapter 6, the Joseph Smith translation of verse 3. But what I'd like to do to close up today is talk about this incident where that led to Moses fleeing Pharaoh's court, because the great church leader, the first martyr of the Christian era, Stephen, in the book of Acts, talks about this. And I always wondered why it would be that when Stephen is about to be stoned and he has an opportunity to say what are going to be his last words to the Pharisees, to those who think that the law is being threatened, that he takes, all this time, enters into this lengthy discourse about the patriarchs, about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Like, why doesn't he preach Jesus? I often ask myself. And so, if you look at Acts chapter 7, you have Stephen standing before these men who are about to kill him. And what does he say? He rehearses to them something they already know, something that's familiar. Maybe that's a rhetorical device to get them to create credibility, to make himself feel like an insider, to make them trust him, to feel like he's an insider, like, okay, we're familiar with this, we believe this. And so he goes through this long thing about Joseph. He calls his kindred 70 souls, 75 people down to him in Egypt. This is Acts chapter 7. So Jacob went down into Egypt and died, he and our fathers. And, he goes into detail about how the children of Israel are then enslaved. And when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. So I guess we do have an answer there, that I'm reminded that Stephen said this. So there must be some lost scripture or some other source that existed 2,000 years ago that tells us Moses' age, 40, and also that he that he knew they were his brethren. Okay. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. Now, I don't know to what degree that's Stephen editorializing and giving Moses an understanding that Moses did not yet have, because clearly Moses had not yet had the whole experience with the burning bush and gotten his commission, or had that experience that we have recorded in Moses chapter 1, right? Where he went up into a high mountain and God said, I have a work for thee to do, Moses, my son, for thou shalt be made stronger than many waters. So foreshadowing the parting of the Red Sea. So it sounds to me like what Stephen is quoting here is some source we don't have. And according to that, Moses, before he left Pharaoh's court, knew of his heritage and went and visited his brethren. And Stephen attributes to him already some kind of understanding that God was going to deliver them through Moses. Now, who knows? Maybe Moses thought that it was going to be more of a conventional deliverance. Hey, I'm a prince of Egypt. I can make it work. I can use my influence. I can use my authority to maybe persuade Pharaoh. So maybe that's what Stephen means. So anyway, he defends this Egyptian. We're in Acts chapter 7, verse 25. And the next day he showed himself unto them as they strove, and would have set them at one again, saying, Sirs, ye are brethren, why do ye wrong one to another? So he's trying to play this role of an arbiter, a peacemaker. But he that did his neighbor wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made thee a ruler and a judge over us? Wilt thou kill me as thou didst the Egyptian yesterday? So now Moses realizes the game's up. Then fled Moses at this saying, and was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begat 2 sons. And when 40 years were expired, there appeared unto him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in the flame of fire in a bush. Now, in Exodus, it changes the word that the angel appeared to him to the Lord appeared to him. So 40 when he left Egypt, and then another 40 years when the Lord appears to him in the burning bush. And so Stephen is recounting all of this, and he's got his murderous, angry, Pharisaical audience lulled into acceptance because, hey, they believe this too. This is what they've been taught since they were toddlers. And so Stephen has them reeled in, and then he slams the gate behind them, right? In chapter 35 of Acts 7, now that he's got them agreeing with everything he's saying, Stephen turns to them and saying, This Moses, whom they refused, saying, Who made thee a ruler and a judge? The same did God send to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel which appeared to him in the bush. And then he draws the connection. He continues, he plants that seed, but then he draws the connection with Jesus Christ. They have now done the same to Jesus, who God has sent to be a ruler and a deliverer over them. They've thrust him away, just like the ancient Egyptian or the ancient Israelites did. So Stephen says, which also our fathers that came after. Okay, so he's talking about the establishment of the land of Israel. And then he says in 51, Ye stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, ye do always resist the Holy Ghost. As your fathers did, so do ye. And so that is why Stephen is quoting this whole story of Moses, is that Moses is a type of Jesus Christ, the person who God sends to deliver them, his son, Jesus. They thrust away. Who made you to be a ruler and a deliverer, a judge, and a ruler over us. And so that rejection of Moses was a shadow of the Jewish nation rejecting Jesus Christ. And yet, of course, just as Moses came back and did deliver Israel, doing mighty works and wonders, so Jesus Christ has sat down on the right hand of God and is doing the work of gathering Israel and restoring his gospel and preparing the earth for his second coming. So I love that we can use the New Testament. We'll see this later with or we've already seen it to some degree with Paul in Hebrews, right? Where he teaches us and gives us information about Abraham that we don't have from Genesis, and draws parallels with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as shadows of Jesus Christ. So that brings us up to the burning bush and Moses going back to Pharaoh to demand the release, the liberation of his brethren, the Israelites. So I bear you my testimony as every time I read the scriptures, I'm impressed again as to the levels of meaning, the types, the symbols, God's foreknowledge and purposes, and how he, and I bear you my testimony that he does not change. You could look at this and say, okay, that was thousands of years ago. That was chosen prophets, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. But I'm just, fill in your name. I'm not those people. But God is no respecter of persons. And as he did to them, he will do to us. He does not love us any less than he loved these men who put their faith and their trust in him, even when things made absolutely no sense, even when things could not get any harder. And then he showed them that he had a bigger, grander plan, not just for the brief period that they were in mortality, but that would stretch on dozens of generations, thousands of years, and bring about glory and righteous salvation of countless people. And so that's who our God is. And he calls himself the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he would be just as happy to call himself the God of fill in your name, the God of Ryan and Ben and Thomas, and because that is who he is. He is the God of the faithful. He is the God of those who trust him. And that is what Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph did. They trusted. And so if we are to follow in their steps, and we have the opportunity to do that, we have to do the same thing. We have to trust that same God, Jehovah, and what he is doing in our own lives. And I testify that if we do that, he will show us that he is mighty, that he knows us, that he has purposes that we cannot begin to comprehend for our lives and for our posterity. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.